for today's special interview, well, we know that the Sunung, the college entrance exam, is such an important exam in a young person's life, whether it's the first time, second, or nth time taking it. It is just now, 41 days away, and some of our listeners may have kids at home who are likely feeling the pressure as it gets closer. And it's probably not just a Sunung. We have kids that are looking ahead to their midterms right now. It's midterm season as well. Well, a recent study has grabbed attention with some interesting findings. It turns out that top performing students aren't just working hard. They are also great at managing their emotions. Controlling anxiety and perfectionism may be the hidden secret to academic success, showing that emotional balance may play a major role in achieving great results. But let's find out more. We've invited back to the airwaves Dr. Alice Tan, an internist at Seoul MizMedi Hospital. She's going to join us to tell us more. Hi, Dr. Tan.
Hello.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us again. So first of all, let me ask you this. Can you break down the results of this recent study? Because this is fascinating. This maybe link between emotional control and academic performance.
Right. So it was a pretty big study. The results were a little bit complicated, but what they found in a nutshell is for students who are taking the Sunung, or the College Scholastic Achievement Test, high achievers seem to have moderate test anxiety levels, moderate levels of perfectionism. Compared to students who had, say, higher levels of test anxiety or higher levels of what they considered neuroticism, or they also looked at self-efficacy, which is a measure of a student's self-confidence in their own levels. And then the other aspect that seemed to influence test performance, was perfectionism. And so looking at all of these characteristics, what they found is high achievers, so students who scored higher on these tests, they had lower test anxiety, less neuroticism, higher self-efficacy, and less socially prescribed perfectionism. In other words, perfectionism based on other people's standards. And this was a very interesting study, and the results are very interesting because it opens the door for, it's not just studying, it's also about how you study and how you think about the test. And as you mentioned, emotional control. So getting into the right mindset,
yes,
as part of the preparation process for taking this all-important once-a-year test.
So I was thinking about this as you were relaying to our listeners all of these important findings. So do you think, in your opinion, do you think that it's because that the high achievers, that they have prepared so well, so much, that's why they have those low levels or lower levels of test anxiety, or what do you think?
So you're asking whether or not, preparedness,
yes,
how much a student has prepared is acting as sort of a confounder, or, is changing the results of the study. But they did try to control for that. And so it seems like, yes, of course, preparedness is an important factor. But if we control for that, then these other sort of emotional or psychological factors are also playing a role in a student's performance.
I see. And so when we talk about getting your, checking yourself and getting your emotions in check and whatnot, do you think that things like something like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or that it could be actually helpful or beneficial, or is it relevant at all to academic success?
Well, I think it's not only can it influence academic success, but in this field of sports as well. So high performance athletes who are elite athletes at the top of their games, Olympians, professional level sports players, they often use a therapist or a psychologist, a sports psychologist, to help them optimize their performance. And I think we can say that the same could be said about an academic test-taking situation, because it's not just your mental game in terms of what do you know, but how can you optimize your performance going into the test situation, so that, if you've studied, up to 100, then you can perform up to 100 on test day. There might be students who, did all the preparedness up to 100, but on test day, because of their nerves or because of anxiety or what we talked about, their perfectionism, getting the better of them. But even though they prepared up to 100, they may only perform up to 70. And so that's what we want, is using techniques such as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a psychiatric treatment that seeks to change and optimize a person's thinking and their behavior to get better results. I think this is something that can be explored. And also there are learnable techniques to help improve performance in these levels.
Wow. So when we talk about optimizing, you just mentioned the word optimizing a couple times. What is a secret to kind of optimizing, especially when we're talking about these top performing students? How do they stay cool under pressure? While others, even as we talked about, maybe they're really prepared. However, they just kind of on the day of, they just don't do as well.
Right. Some of the techniques include visualization. Other techniques include kind of doing run-throughs in advance. So pre-runs, kind of like they do for stage performance. Of course, there are rehearsals.
Yes.
So rehearsals, simulating the actual test situation, and then getting coaching and feedback after a student's performance.
Sure.
And then there are mind sort of exercises, controlling also your physical state. So in terms of your sleep, what you're eating the days before the test, how much exercise you're getting. These are all techniques to try to improve test day performance. And there's kind of a checklist that students at any level, anyone who's taking a test, they can go through and sort of plan out in terms of, it's like preparing for a marathon. So 1 month before, what are you going to do? 3 weeks before, and then sort of doing a countdown to test day and making sure you're sort of staying on track in terms of how to prepare not just your body, but also your mind.
Right. And earlier, from the get-go, when you talked about these high achievers, Dr. Dunn, you mentioned that the perfectionism, that level was pretty moderate compared to other test takers. So I'm very curious about this, because some people might think, well, aren't high achievers perfectionists? And maybe you can even tell us about, if you don't mind, if it's not too personal, I'm assuming assuming that you were a high achiever. Were you a perfectionist, or is that something that is kind of like an old wives' tale, something that we kind of think high achievers should be?
So the authors of the study, they differentiated between two types of perfectionism. And one type of perfectionism is when you compare yourself to standards that others, so in terms of society, others have established. And then there's a type of perfectionism where you're kind of competing against yourself and your own standards. So the type of perfectionism that was correlated with poorer performance was people who had higher levels of perfectionism in that sort of social context, where they're always trying to beat someone else, or, am I doing as well as the other person? Where's my score relative to everybody else? Whereas if a person is setting their own goals and standards and working to achieve those goals as best as they can, that seemed to correlate with better performance. And then what you asked about my own personal temperament, I guess you could say.
Sure.
I do admit to being a perfectionist, but I'm not a very competitive person. Even with my exercise routines, I prefer swimming or jogging. I don't like playing tennis or competitive sports where I actually have to beat somebody.
Okay.
And I think I mean, in reading this study, I didn't realize that there were these two different forms of perfectionism. But after reading the study, I think I benefited from having more of, my own set of what I can achieve, my own goals.
Sure.
And then that, I guess, was a way of a healthier way of
coping,
approaching,
right? Yes.
Yeah, approaching my test taking strategies.
Thank you for sharing not just information, but also your personal story as well. Why is it though? Because it's really difficult. We live in a competitive society all around the world, but especially academically here in Korea. I mean, the rankings, the 줄세우기, I mean, everything is a competition and you are ranked against other students. So I do get it. But is that why students, they really do care about what others perceive in terms of that perfectionism, that side of the perfectionism?
Yeah. So I think in South Korea and in other places around the world as well, I think there's a community in Northern California that unfortunately, they have this same sort of ecosystem where students are put in a highly, highly competitive environment.
Yes.
And they're always forced to, by their families or, they put it on themselves. They're forced to compete and then outcompete their peers.
Yes.
And it puts a lot of stress on kids. And part of the problem is all of this stress that can be generated can be very counterproductive. Of course, as I mentioned at the beginning part of this interview, moderate levels of perfectionism, moderate levels of anxiety, those are actually helpful. You don't want someone to just say, oh, I don't care. I don't care if I fail or, I don't care about this test. It doesn't matter to me. You want moderate levels. If the levels are too high or cause too much stress for the student, totally counterproductive, and it can really hinder the student's performance and also hinder the student's mental health, their self-esteem. And so I think it's important to give students perspective in terms of, what does this one test really mean in terms of your entire, 30, 40, 60 years of life ahead of you.
Right.
And, if you give them that perspective and that there are other options for how you define success in life, I think that can be a helpful way to approach this sunung kind of, anxiety that the whole country actually goes through, right?
Yes.
Everyone has to be very, very quiet when the students are taking the test.
And for our final wrap-up questions, you already mentioned what students can do, but what about the people around the students, namely, AKA the parents, the family members, where even any passing comment, can definitely affect the student, who is under extreme pressure. So from, from your professional perspective, Dr. Tan, what should we and should we not be doing? Because we're talking about things like emotional control and academic performance and, how to stay cool under pressure. But there's, got to be an effect of what we say and how we behave around these children.
Right. I think it's really important to bolster students, young people's self-confidence and self-esteem. I think it's important to give them a sense of stability at home. In other words, no matter what happens on test day and no matter what results come out, our love for you as parents, as family will not change. Our support for you will not change. And to really repeat that message over and over in different ways so the student feels, okay, this is an important test. A lot is riding on this test.
Yes.
But it's not the end of my life if I don't get the score that I want. Because unfortunately, some children, they end up thinking that way.
Yes.
So it's important to let them know that even if you don't get the score that you want, of course, in Korea, as you said, some people take the test 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, multiple times.
Yes.
So there's always another opportunity. And then there are always different pathways to, what a person would define as a successful life. And that's very subjective. And there are many options out there. So I think taking sort of a couple steps back, giving them a bigger picture so that they can envision, possibilities outside of this very narrow scope of this one test and one test score and, what defines success in our culture. I think that's important to plant those seeds, because even if, and I'll say I have one teenager left in the house, and I'll say, even if it feels like as a parent, it like this teenager is not listening, is not registering what you're saying.
Right.
They do hear. They do hear it. And their face may be completely blank as you're telling them these messages.
Yes.
But the message is being planted in their minds. And so it's very important to give them these sort of reassuring messages, try to boost their self-esteem as much as they can, so that they can perform, to the best of their ability. That's what we're trying to get to at the end.
Of course, of course. Well, thank you so much for coming on air with us once again to share your expertise with our listeners. Thank you, Dr. Dan.
Thank you.